Yes, so when we are gathering information about a client, so very first thing you do with any client is gather information about them through a variety of sources, and that can be face-to-face or through some other means. One of the very first things you must establish is what languages they speak, how many, what to what degree, in which ways they use that language. In the case of a child, how far along their language has developed and in what ways. That would be gathered either through an observation or through asking carers, for example, or teachers. So we can have a variety of linguistic backgrounds. People might describe themselves as being monolingual or bilingual, and they might not using those terms, but that's meaning that. They would tell us what languages they speak, and we would ask them in very general terms what they use those languages for. For example, asking them whether if they're bilingual, let's say in English and Spanish, whether they read or need to read in Spanish, or whether they only do that in English, for example. So getting further and further into that. And that's crucial to our profession, because it's very much the work of a speech and language therapist to see, in the case of an adult client where there has been a breakdown of a previously intact system, you need to be able to assess the baselines of where that person was before and where they would like to go from now that they've had their breakdown for whatever reason, or where they need to be to get back to their previous life, or where they would like to be. So those questions start off very general, can get very, very detailed, and we can do very, very detailed assessments of the client's linguistic profile in whatever language or languages they speak. In the case of a child, obviously all children have basic needs, which include functioning in their daily environment and getting on at school and accessing the school curriculum. So those are our aims with any child, and we start off by assessing them. There are some variations from the norm. Obviously, you have bilingual or multilingual clients, but you may also have clients whose first language is, for example, a sign language. There are clients, for example, who speak British Sign Language or use British Sign Language. That's their first language, but they may also know English. There are some clients who may be raised in a community where British Sign Language is the only language which is used, and that is then becomes a very specialist area for a speech and language therapist. Then we also have certain clients who may not have any verbal language of any kind at all, and may only be using non-verbal communication or some kind of augmented communication. Their only means of communication may be an electronic device or something like that. And yes, and within bilingual clients, so with children or adults, there is in any community a certain amount of code switching, and that can be quite an unpredictable phenomenon. The difficulty being there really with assessing that person. There are very few assessments, speech and language therapy assessments, which deal with bilingual clients satisfactorily. There have been a couple that have been developed for children in particular, but it's an area which is it's underdeveloped really. The training you get as a speech and language therapist is very broad, so you cover many different disciplines, everything from anatomy and physiology and neurology to counselling skills, for example, and everything in between, all the major linguistic fields that apply, psychology, child development, and all of those things. And the reason for that is that as a speech and language therapist you need to have a very firm grasp of both the cognitive aspects of language and the socio-cultural and the social aspects of language. And the reason for that is that when you have any client walking through your door, you have no idea what you're going to be faced with, and it is your job to assess that case and assess that client and do the best thing for that person, and that can be extremely variable. So it could be that you have somebody who's, for example, developed aphasia after a stroke, who has very specific language deficits that they are aware of and they want to fulfill, that requires quite a specific knowledge of how language breaks down, how it works, how it's processed, and what you can do to help repair that breakdown. Or at the other end, you may have an adult with an extreme learning difficulty who hasn't got any verbal language at all, who is low functioning in many aspects of their lives, and your prime role in that case would be to modify their environment and to be sensitive to their environment, to the people around them, and help them to function better in that environment, but it may not have anything to do with any verbal or non-verbal type of communication. So those are the two extremes. And then in the middle, of course, you've got, let's say, your average child client, well, not an average child client, but a child client with a language disorder who is now in school, the language disorder hasn't resolved. Your job there is multifaceted. You have to be able to diagnose, if you like, and deal with their very specific speech or language deficits, you know, and in a productive way. But you also have to be able to assimilate all of that within the environment in which they work, and also their psychological development. So it's equal, I would say, and that's why the training reflects that. It covers both of those aspects equally, and through your practice and through your placement experience, then your practice as a therapist, I would say that you have to deal with both. As you progress through your career and you become more specialised, it could be that one of those areas dominates more than the other, depending on what you specialise in.